Welcome to the Insight Teen Hour. My name is Frederick. I'm from Insight Treatment Programs, and this is the time where we're going to talk about issues related to teen mental health. It's Monday at 2 p.m. here in KHTS 98.1 FM. And today in the studio, I've invited a local guest who represents a private practice here in our community, who is an author and an LMFT.
Yes.
Tracy Terrace, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So Tracy's here in the studio today because she works in her private practice. Her and her clinicians work with a lot of parents and teens, and some of the things they're focusing on, some of the things they think is very important, is sort of to help and guide parents on how to set boundaries. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. We're also going to sort of address how to empower parents and teens when there's issues going on in the family, when people are struggling. And we're going to talk a little bit about values and how important it is for parents to be mindful of the values that they represent and the values that they are standing behind, because those values obviously sort of reflects what boundaries you have in the family or what rules you have in the families. Yes. And what expectations you have to your teens in your family. So Tracy made it very clear to me that it's important to work with families on what these values are. Mm-hmm. So we're going to address that. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about something Tracy refers to as 2 homes and 1 heart. Basically, how to navigate when there's crisis in the family or conflict in the family, how to navigate that in a civil way. Because often what we see here at Insight, what I'm seeing at Insight, of course, is that often the conflict spirals into situations where things are being said that are very difficult to take back, and where people really start, or in the family, you start hurting each other and saying things that takes a long time to sort of get back and remedy and fix, right?
Yes.
So we're going to talk a little bit about how can you argue or discuss things at home without going into a place where it becomes destructive.
Yes.
Finally, Tracy, we're also going to talk about your new book, and that's coming out in November, called Many Voices, One Truth. Mm-hmm. So, but let's start with maybe talking a bit about yourself.
Okay.
And why you're in this field, why you're dedicating so much of your life to help others and parents and teens, and what is your private practice like?
Okay, thank you. Again, thanks for having me. And again, my name's Tracy Terrace, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist here in Santa Clarita. I own and operate a group private practice where there is a staff of 8 clinicians, which are also therapists. Total, 3 of them are interns, and the other 5 of us are licensed. And we treat a variety of issues that come into the center, from individual to couples to family therapy, kids and teens, every now and then, depending on whatever topic is trending right now. Sometimes we will have groups. And so if you are interested in coming in to see one of us, the name of our practice is healingthemindandspirit.com. And you could find us on the web, and you can go on and look at the different bios in the Our Team tab, and see which therapist you think you connect with from the bio. And then you would call our office at 661-481-0017, and one of our receptionists, either Madison or Emily, will connect you with the therapist that best suits your needs, first and foremost regarding what's going on in your life or your family, and then which one has a schedule that will match up more with your schedule. And so the reason I got into therapy is because I went to therapy in my late 20s and it worked. So I had grown up with a few trauma type events and grief-related, disappointment-related type events and situations going on in my life, and I didn't know how to process them. And so a friend of mine suggested therapy, and I went to see one therapist, and it was okay. It wasn't a, big giant, insight or understanding, but it did help a little. And then finally I found this other therapist, this and it just worked. Like everything that she did helped me, and I walked away feeling everyone needs this, you know. And at the time, I wasn't thinking I would become a therapist. I just started referring people to her. Her name is Dr. Barbara Cohen, and she's in Tarzana. She's awesome. So, but eventually, just something dawned on me, and I had this thought in my mind: you need to be a therapist. And it resonated, it felt right. So I ran it by my husband and three of my closest friends, and each one of them were like, oh, I could totally see you doing that. Because I have a love for people. I have a natural affinity for helping people to do well and meet their goals and just operate in the spirit of love and peace and whoever it is they're originally created to be. And I know that a lot of family drama and dynamics, trauma, abuse, just all of the different mental health things that can go on within a person can really debilitate you. You can end up being and looking like someone that you're not even supposed to be. Like, who am I originally created to be? And that's one of the main reasons I do therapy is I have a belief that we all have the answers on the inside. We just may not have access to them due to mental health issues, due to trauma, due to negative thinking patterns. And so I believe that my job as a therapist, and we all take this view over at Healing the Mind and Spirit, whereby you probably already have the answers on the inside, but it's our job to peel back some of the layers, clear away some of the debris so that you can get to what it is you know you ought to do or need to do for yourself and for your family in any given situation.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, obviously, I could question, teenagers sometimes that we deal with the most, right? They sometimes obviously does need a bit of guidance. They might
Yeah.
not necessarily be sure where they are, but as a family unit, right? Parents who are so crucial in the teenagers'
Yeah.
ability to move forward in the right direction.
Yeah.
They often know, right?
Yeah, they do.
What it is that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, well, I would say like when you're working with teens as a family, one of the best things that you can do, like if you're in a two-parent home, because not everybody's in a two-parent home. We live in a different time. There's single parents, single mothers, single fathers. But when you're in I'll address the single parent in a second, but when you're in a two-parent home, one of the best gifts that you can give your children is to be on the same page as a team, because kids, they know, which one is the sucker. They know which one is not going to play this, that, or the other, and they'll pit you against one another, right? And so even if you don't agree with what is the right avenue to take with whatever situation, have a discussion about it outside of the hearing range of the children and come to a resolution, come to some kind of solution that you're going to try as a team. If you're a single parent, the same thing. You have to figure out and what is it that my child needs? What is it that my family needs? And figure out on your own, either get advice, like talk to other people, talk to other parents. And even if you're in a two-parent home, I think it's a good idea to get advice from parents who have gone before you. So like who already have raised teenagers and whatnot and are on the other side. But as a single parent as well, stand your ground, not necessarily being rigid or overly strict, but understand that it's kind of your job to raise this child and to set them up for the future, because the moment they start walking, we're really preparing them to launch. And so the teen years can seem like rebellion, and sometimes it is. Sometimes they do engage in rebellious behaviors, but a lot of times in the beginning, it's not necessarily that. It's more they're trying to figure out who they are. There's a psychosocial developmental stage called identity versus role confusion, and that's the adolescent years. And that starts coming online pre-adolescence, and they're just trying to figure out, who am I apart from who my parents say I am? And a lot of times they turn to their peers to figure that out. That's why you'll see teenagers acting like this kid in the neighborhood or that kid at school, because they're just trying to figure out, who am I apart from who my parents say I am? Looking to their peers, sometimes that's helpful, but a lot of times it's not, because their peers are also trying to figure
Figure
out
out
the
who
same
they
thing.
are.
So it can
Yeah.
end up being the blind leading the blind, leading the blind. But I think where parents make a lot of mistakes is they take that personal, like, you're not listening to me, or you're not obeying me, or whatever. And it's not about that. It's about, they're just trying to figure out who they are. So I think the best tactic to take with that is, instead of telling them what to do and telling them, don't listen to your peers or your friends, I'm the authority, I'm the adult, blah, 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 ask a lot of questions, because what you want to initiate is the development of that prefrontal cortex. That doesn't really come online fully until about 25. But in all my years of working with teenagers, when I talk about the prefrontal cortex with them and I tell them something like, well, that's kind of hard for you because that part of your brain isn't developed yet, it's like they want to, they start thinking through. And I think, that starts wiring and rewiring, certain neural circuitry, because they're thinking along the lines. And so when you ask them questions, what you're getting them to do is thinking about whether or not that's a good idea. Think through to the end, because that's the prefrontal cortex thing. It's like, you don't develop the, if I do this, then this will happen, until much later in life. But I believe that some aspects of that you can start engaging them and questioning themselves and thinking through, if I do this, what is likely to happen. And so I think questioning is a good, it's a less conflictual way than trying to change their minds because you, as a parent, know what is right. You probably are right, but you're not going to get them to see
No,
that.
that's true. It's also a more sort of engaging way, right? You are finding a common ground. You're discussing something without being judgmental, without
Yeah.
judging what they've been doing, or why they
Yeah.
do certain things, but just being curious,
Yeah.
right? About why they do certain things.
Yeah.
Because you're obviously triggered as a parent, usually because it's against your value system or belief system. We'll get back to that, but and that often plays in, right?
Yeah.
That you feel as a parent provoked or disregarded or sad about them making certain decisions or trying certain things.
Yeah.
But you mentioned something very, very important, I think, and that was the fact that as parents, it's important that we're on the same page. Even if we often, opposite attracts, right? And we marry somebody who has a different background than yourself. And I think when you have kids, that really starts standing out, right? When you have to raise your kids, that's when
Yeah.
you realize, wow, we're really different on our values and core beliefs. But the point is, what I want to make sure we sort of get out here today is that, look, to if we are different, sometimes we gotta compromise on
Yeah.
that just to be on the same page.
Yes.
Because there's nothing more destructive in a family dynamic when dad allows for one thing and mom has a different approach.
Yeah.
As you say, not only will the kids manipulate and find a way to use this to their advantage and play mom and dad out against each other, but it also feels confusing to kids sometimes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Confusing to the whole family dynamic. So I think it's important that parents, we at Inside, we often have conversations with parents, say, look, you might be right, it might be the best way to go, what you're presenting, but dad is presenting something else, and
Yeah.
for now, for this time around, could we please just agree on one or the other way?
Yeah.
Nobody's going to know what's best at the end of the day, but we just need you guys to be united, because otherwise the teen is not going to feel it, and it's not going to go the right way.
Yeah, and,
So-
and I have two tools. Like, when you as a parent find yourself in that situation, like you and your partner are arguing about what's the best route to take, and or you feel yourself triggered. Like, a lot of times when people are triggered, if you can take a beat, I call it taking a beat, and ask yourself, what am I feeling and where am I feeling it in my body? And so, what you do when you ask yourself that question is you get into your prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking and reasoning, and you get out of your limbic system, which is the emotional. Like, those two can't be primary at the same time. One will be the primary. So, the minute you feel something, sometimes the words are out of our mouth before we realize how emotional we are feeling. So, one of the things I tell people is ask yourself, where do I feel it in my body? And so if you feel it in your head, you're probably just like super angry and frustrated. And when that happens, a lot of times something previous is coloring this. So you want to separate that out so that you're just dealing with right now. If you feel it in your throat, it may be that you have something to say and either you feel powerless or you feel like you don't have a voice in this situation or you can't articulate it. If you feel it in your heart, like feel it in your heart, that's grief and loss and fear. Like it may be something that you are, I grew up in the 80s, that's why I keep saying like, but it may be something that you are fearing for your child or for your family, but you cannot allow fear to govern, because if it does, no matter how good your intentions are, no matter how good the end game is, the fear is going to make you behave in a certain anxious way and maybe even a scary way, especially if you're someone that suffers with anger and managing anger and things like that. So identify where you feel it in your body. If you feel it in your gut, feeling things in your gut is often an indication that you think, something's wrong with you. And so you have to put that aside and know that there's nothing wrong with you. There's something going on in the family that you have to pull yourself back, take a beat before you go forward and get into an argument. And then the other thing is reframing the problem as the problem. A lot of times when we're in conflict, I might see you as a problem and you might see me as a problem. Same thing with the parents. Mom sees dad as a problem. And no one in the family is the problem. There may be someone engaging in problematic behavior, but the problem is the problem. And if you can reframe that as a team, then you can tackle the problem and not necessarily the kid, or feel like the kid is tackling you.
Yeah, it's very important to sort of figure out, what am I feeling right now? Why am I reacting in a certain way? And I think a lot of parents, or a lot of people in general, think, oh, this is just life. We just got to figure it out. But I think we can really benefit sometimes from getting some of these things put into a perspective, right, with a therapist, and that's what a therapist can help you with, right? To really figure out, where do you feel this? Where is this coming from?
Exactly.
Good. We have to go into a quick little break, but we'll be back in a few minutes, and Tracy and I will continue to talk about, how to set boundaries and what values are we building some of these boundaries on. So hang tight, and you'll be back. We'll be back, and you're listening to KHTS 98.1 FM, and this is the Insight Teen Hour. Good afternoon, and welcome back. This is the Insight Teen Hour. I'm here in the studio with Tracy Terrace from healingthemindandspirit.com, or Healing the Mind and Spirit private practice here in Santa Clarita. And Tracy and I are talking about, boundaries and how important it is for parents to be on the same page as they're raising the teens, who by nature, of course, are testing boundaries and pushing back and acting out sometimes as part of their development process, right? But we're talking a little bit, or I would like to talk a little bit about boundaries and how you, Tracy, and your coworkers in your private practice, how you're helping parents and families sort of set boundaries, and what they should be basing these boundaries on. How you're supporting that process, because I know it's something that a lot of parents with teenage kids are struggling with. Whether it's boundaries related to social media, or whether it's partying, or whether it's you name it. But there's plenty of boundaries to be set, right? So how do you, in your private practice, what families do you typically work with? Why would they come to you? What is the situation like when they come and ask for some sort of support in that process?
Okay. Yes, sometimes we'll get calls from people who feel like they are having a hard time setting boundaries. Like in the last segment, we talked about the teenage years and how they can look like years of rebellion. And so sometimes parents will come in wanting help navigating the parenting process and how to set boundaries. And so there's a specific tool that I use when helping families set boundaries. And before I talk about the tool, because the tool, it's boundary settings, but it's also connected to your values. I think that if you're going to set boundaries with especially teens, then they should be governed by your values. And your values are those beliefs and thought processes that govern your choices and behaviors. But in talking about boundaries, I want your listeners to think of boundaries from the standpoint of, all of my thoughts, words, feelings, and behaviors belong to me, and all of my resources of time, energy, money, whatever, belong to me, and all of your thoughts, words, feelings, and behaviors belong to you. All of your teens' thoughts, words, feelings, behaviors, and resources belong to them. So when people are in a marriage or in the family, sometimes they do share resources like money,
Hmm.
time, and even energy if they're, taking a trip or doing something together as a family. But a lot of times when people think of boundaries, they only think of how much am I going to put up with and where am I going to put my foot down? Or how much am I going to let in and how much am I going to keep out? And that's a part of boundaries, but it's such a small part of boundaries that such a small part that people end up thinking almost exclusively of what am I going to keep out? What walls am I going to put up? And it's not necessarily about walls, it's more about how do you all want to live your life as a family. And so there's this presentation that I have. I haven't taught it in a while, but I teach, and I do teach it to families one on one in family session where you create a values book. And so the values are where you would have a family meeting, and in this family meeting, you guys would name what are your like say top 5 or 10 values as a family, and each person would name what are their like top 2 or 3 values. And so it may be something like, well, as a family, we value love, we value fun, we value communication, we value safety, we value education. Just come up. Don't I wouldn't have just the mom and dad do it. I would do it with the kids and teens. And if you could get this done when your kids are little or preteens, all the better. But if you already have teenagers, you can still, implement this tool. And so in setting boundaries, what you want to say is, we want our boundaries to be around what it is we value. So for example, let's say if we let's see, how can I say this without my presentation? So, like, if we have a value that, a safety value, safety in the home and having adults around and not having a lot of kids. So, our values create a belief system. So, like, if we believe that, if you are under 15 years old, then there should be at least one functioning adult around if you're going to have kids over. So the rule might be you're not allowed to hang out at your friend's house with a bunch of other teens past a certain time if there isn't another adult around. And so what you want to do is you want to write that down. This is what our belief is, and this is what the rule, which is the boundary. This is what the boundary is. And then you want to come up as a family with, okay, what are going to be the consequences of this? And the consequences are interesting because parents like to come up with consequences, but if you allow them to participate in it, some kids, not all kids, but some kids will actually be harder on themselves than you would as the parent. Let them, come up with them, let them have a hand in it. You would come up with some as well, but you would talk about it as a family with regards to why this consequence should be in place, and try as much as you can to think of consequences that fit the offense. Like in our day, because of these phones and kids love phones and social media and things like that, we just want to take those. But unless they were posting a bunch of selfies at this gathering where there was no adult, then maybe the phone and social media might match. But try to make it match whatever the offense was. So if you discover that your kid was over at so and so's house and it was 8 of them there and not one adult on the scene, then maybe the consequence might be, okay, then you don't get to go over to that friend's house for a few days or a week. Or there's a party or gathering coming up. Maybe you don't get to go, or maybe you can go, but you're only going to go for the first hour or the last hour or whatever. And then, list out, I think that each of these should have at least 3 or 4 consequences, with it ratcheting up. Like first offense, you don't go over for a week. Second offense, okay, you do this before this party comes up this summer, then that's going to be off the table. Third offense is the first two plus whatever else. You want to make it the consequences larger and larger. And I can tell you that parents that have done this, they report they hardly ever get to the third or the fourth consequence, because the thing about consequences is kids don't take them seriously unless you actually follow through with a consequence. But a lot of times we give consequences that would imprison us too. Like, well, you can't go anywhere all weekend. So guess what? You're probably not going anywhere all weekend either as a parent. And you don't want to do that. So then you get lenient on it. So then kids learn that, consequences mean nothing because there's no follow through. But when you consistently follow through and you're using this little tool that I'm talking about, parents have reported that they hardly ever get to the third or fourth because the first two were held to, and so they don't want the third one plus the first two or the fourth one.
Makes sense. But it's an interesting. So here's my thought, right? So okay, we have a meeting, we sit down as a family, we discuss the values, we discuss. Often, I would imagine, from my experience, is that the teen will push hard against whatever values that the parents come up with. So they would say, safety. What are you talking about, Dad? It's not unsafe for me as a 16-year-old, 15-year-old in this case, to be alone without parents. That's ridiculous. That's not a blah, blah. How do you navigate that when there is, in that conversation, in many cases, I'm sure, there won't be, what's it called? They just won't agree.
Yeah.
Right? How do you then, how do you navigate that? What do you do? Do you end up saying, well, sometimes the teen is right, they decide what the rules should be. Sometimes mom and dad is right, they decide. Or sometimes dad is right, sometimes mom is right. What do you do when there's that conflict internally in the family?
Yeah, that's a very good example of a situation where you're trying to come up with this and conflict can ensue because the teen probably will not agree. And so this would be a good opportunity to ask questions. Like, I would first validate, yeah, you're right. It probably isn't necessarily unsafe for you to be in the house with your friends without an adult present. But what are some things that could go wrong and how would you guys navigate that? And then ask them, like, first validate, yeah, you're probably right. More than likely, nothing will happen, but there's always an off chance. So what are some things that could, and engage them in a conversation, and you come up with some. So if you're going to do this, make sure you do have an answer. What if someone gets hurt? What if someone, like if someone comes over that you guys weren't expecting and that person causes trouble? Do you feel comfortable asking that person to leave? If you do, great. But I would still feel more comfortable as your parent if the owner or one of the owners of the house asked that person to leave and not put you in the middle of that situation. So you just want to come up with scenarios that they may not be thinking of, because a teenager would absolutely say, well, what do you mean safety? And so you might have to define what safety is. Safety doesn't necessarily mean something catastrophic like somebody getting hurt. It could be someone's feelings getting hurt. It could be getting into things that you guys as a group should not be getting into, whether it's watching something online that you shouldn't be watching or having conversations that are not comfortable for everyone to navigate. But you want to come up with examples, but not necessarily, it's such a fine dance. It's like you don't necessarily want to tell it to them as, this is what's going to happen or this could happen. You want to engage them in conversation, asking questions, what if questions, or what would this look like? And at the end of the day, because there's always that teenager will argue you to the end. At the end of the day, in my book, not all parents may agree with this, but in my book, it's always okay, in my book, to say, well, these are the boundaries. I don't mind you hanging out with your friends, but I don't feel comfortable not having an adult present, a functioning adult. And the reason you want to say functioning adult, because you don't want so-and-so's 18 or 19-year-old brother who could care less what they're doing. It has to be someone that has a vested interest in everyone having a good time and everyone being returned to their parents safely and in one piece. And safely, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, Tracy, there are absolutely those cases where you just have to say, I'm sorry, we can't agree. But
Yeah.
these are the values that mom and dad have. This is how it's going
Our
to be.
family, the values our
Our
family.
family
Yeah.
has, right? And this is what we are, your parent, and you are only 15. I'm sorry that you don't agree. And but this is how it's going to be. A
Yeah.
little bit of tough love, obviously, from my perspective,
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
inside is healthy too. The other thing I'm thinking is that when you show them those boundaries, and when you show them a little bit of tough love, sometimes kids will just go back and say, "Oh, whatever, blah blah blah," but at least they feel that there are people around them who's there to support them and to help them and to make sure that they're safe, or whatever it might be. It could also be, I'm thinking out loud, but it could also be an opportunity for the families to sort of maybe dig into some of these things and go, why is dad so scared
Yeah.
of something like
Yeah.
this happening? Well, maybe he had his own history.
Yes.
Maybe he had seen another kid or a friend of his who got in trouble. So sometimes being a little, what's it called, as a parent, being a little
Reflective.
reflective, exactly, and sort of talk to your teen that they understand more than you sometimes think.
Yeah.
And if you are a little humble, or if you are a little self-disclosure, that often creates a relationship with your
Yeah.
teen, right?
And you can always fall back on the idea that, honey, this is my job. I'm not going to do it perfectly. I'm not going to have all the answers, but I have to go with my gut on this one.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So
No
I
is
have to
sometimes
invoke
yes.
my veto because, not to say, I'm the parent and I'm all knowing, but in this case, maybe I don't know, but I have to go with what I think would be best for you, and so this is what's going to happen. Maybe we could revisit it at another time.
Yeah.
But do it in a spirit of humility and, openness. But sometimes as a parent, you just have to have the last word, and not in a conflictual or combative way, but for the sake of this is where we need to land.
Absolutely. That's where empowerment comes in, right? Because to make that decision can sometimes be really difficult when you are a parent and you are a little split, or you don't know exactly where your stand is. But
Yeah.
so, but we have to go into another little break here, unfortunately. We'll be back in a few minutes. So when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about empowerment, and maybe address your book. So hang in there. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. You're listening to KHTS 98.1 FM, and this is the Insight Teen Hour. Good afternoon, and welcome back to the Insight Teen Hour. I'm Frederick. I'm from Insight Treatment Programs here in Santa Clarita, a teen IOP, and we're talking about teen mental health again today. And I got Tracy Torres in the studio, an LMFT from the local community here with a private practice down the street,
Yeah.
healing the mind and spirit. And Tracy and I are talking a little bit about, we're talking about how important it is for parents to be on the same page. We're talking about how it's important for parents to be mindful of the values they have in the family, and how that trickles into the boundaries, and how important it is to hold boundaries when you got teens that are struggling a little bit, or testing the boundaries at least, and acting out maybe, and maybe just being teens.
Yeah.
And Tracy and I, we got to a point, Tracy, where we were talking about, where we sort of could segment into how to empower parents to actually hold boundaries in situations where they might be a little in doubt, or where they're very anxious about holding these boundaries and feel that it's very hard to keep pushing them down, and the kids are fighting in. How do you in your private practice, or how does you and your team, how do you guys support parents and help them feel empowered to hold these boundaries when it's needed?
Yeah, well, we teach people to set themselves up for empowerment. So, number one, with the boundaries, if you think of boundaries not so much only as what am I going to keep out, but the idea that my thoughts, words, feelings, and behaviors and resources belong to me and yours belong to you. And you teach your teen that there's nothing more empowering for a teenager to be in a situation where they're feeling pressured, and they can, step back and ask themselves, okay, whose thought is this? Is this a thought that I have about myself, or is this a thought that someone else has about me? Because the bottom line is, what other people think of you is not really your business, is not really your problem, unless they put it on the table. And you could apply that same thing in the family, where you put on the table what it is you guys are thinking and talking about, or what you're feeling with regards to what has been set up. The other thing of empowerment is when you have this family meeting and you each write down what your values are, and you write down, what is the belief or the rule and what all the consequences are. It's very empowering to go back to that, to go back to what it is you have written down and rediscuss. Okay, that you guys said, as the kids, the parents would say, you guys said that this was a value of yours, and this is a value of our family, and this is how it is showing up. This is what's happening to violate that. So how can we all get back on track? And so then having a discussion amongst yourselves, it won't, it's not 100% foolproof to keep you from getting into conflict, but it keeps the conflict down, because again, you're focused on what is the problem that we're addressing and how do we resolve it. And the way we resolve it is we go back to, in what way does this match up with the values that we said we have around this situation as a family? In what way does this match up with the value you said you have for yourself? And that's great for helping teens to navigate peer pressure, because sometimes in order to be liked or accepted, they'll agree to do or say things that go against who they are as a person. And if you could teach your teen how to take a step back, take a beat, and realize that what it is I'm about to engage in, or what it is I'm about to do or say, it's really not me. I mean, that's really hard for a teenager to do. But if you, as the parent, empower them that they have every right to take a beat, they have every right to take a step back before engaging in something, peer to peer, and decide for themselves how they want to move forward. Like, are you willing to move forward with something that's just going to make you feel bad or guilty later? Or are you willing to start practicing how to say no, how to stand up for yourself? Because no is a great, boundary word. Within the family, when there's, conflict going back and forth, again, referring back to what you guys have decided as a family, and
in the value book,
in the value book that you create, or the the values and boundaries book that you create as a family. And again, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to use my veto power, because this does not sound like it's. I don't feel good about where this is going, or where this could go, where you're concerned. When you're older, if you want to do something different, but for now, it's my job to protect you. And so you may not feel like this is protection, but this is what we've decided to do as a parent for your sake.
Yeah. This is the way I can show my love to you, by being a parent and being present and doing this.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm sorry, honey, you don't like it, but this is really my way of showing, my compassion and love for you.
Frederick, you have a very humble way about you. So using that, like, you could say whatever, and if it's coming from a place of humility, it's like, it's really hard for them, to argue with that. They might still, depending on the temperament and the kid, they may still do that, because in the end they want what they want. But you try, as a parent, try to stay in the place of humility, and coming from a place of, this is my way of loving you as my child, and this is my way of protecting us as a family. I admit it may not be the best way, but it's all I've got right now.
Yeah, that's true. Sorry, but we have to start winding down here. Okay. Unfortunately, the hour is almost up, Tracy. Time flies. But it's been a pleasure having you in the studio. Thank you very much for coming in and sharing some of your knowledge and experiences. So we'll be back next week. But before we go there, we got a minute here. So Tracy, tell me, if somebody out there wants to get hold of you or get hold of your private practice, how can they reach you?
We are at www.healingthemindandspirit.com, or you can call our office at 661-481-0017, and one of our assistants will set you up with the therapist that's sounds like would be the best fit for whatever it is you have going on.
Great. And I know, Tracy, here in the last few seconds, I know you are actually adding capacity in your private practice.
Oh, yes.
You're looking for an extra therapist to join you?
Yes, I would love to have someone who speaks Spanish, male or female, come and join our private practice. And that could be someone who is licensed or in the intern status. Nowadays, they call them associates.
Yes,
So,
correct.
Yes.
So if you are therapist or a licensed clinician or an associate out there,
someone.
or know somebody, please call up Tracy and send over your resume. But thank you very much. I appreciate it. It was a pleasure having you on the studio.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. We'll be back next Monday at 2 p.m. for the Insight Teen Hour.